Yes. I can hear people there now. Yeah. I will mute everyone.
Okay, you're just right on time.
It's difficult without a mouse.
You're not late.
Where's the mute all button? Oh, is there a mute all? Maybe it's... Yes, I hit the participants. Oh, yes. Mute all. I got it. Okay. Uncheck it. Right, unchecked. Okay, right. Okay. So then I start the meeting simply with. I'm already on. Okay, people are there. Okay.
Record.
Pause. Stop. Record. It just says it's recording. Fine. Thanks. Okay. Let me just get back to the Rav. I can't see the Rav anymore. It's so difficult. One second. So difficult to move this. You need a mouse on this. I can't see us. Oh, here we are at last. So, I need to pin that. How do I pin it? I can't seem to pin the Rav. I can't find a pin for anything for the Rav. Oh, I see the pin. It's a little icon, and it only appears occasionally. Okay, that's done now. I just expand it. Okay.
If we could get started, I have to go home.
I've been working with the technology.
I just want to hear the rabbi. I don't need the technology.
It doesn't work.
We don't need the technology.
Is it recording?
I hope so. Yes.
Okay, let's go. Good morning, everyone. At the conclusion of this week's Parsha, the Torah tells us the story about the daughters of Tzlofchad, that they asked for their share in the land of Israel. And this was based upon the fact that they had no brothers. Tzlofchad had only 5 daughters. And they wanted to know what is the halacha regarding daughters inheriting the estate, so to speak, of their father. This led to Moshe Rabbeinu detailing for us the laws of inheritance, which the Torah set up. So the first major point that has to be understood is that after a person has passed on from the world, that person has no longer any control over assets that he or she may have owned while being in the world. So then the question is, what happens to these assets? So as long as a person is alive, a person may deal with his or her assets as he wishes, or as she wishes. So if you want to a man can have 10 children, but one of his children is his favorite, or there are other extenuating circumstances. 9 of the children are very wealthy, and one is very poor. So in his lifetime, a person can give away any of his assets to whoever he wants to. No one can restrict him. The Torah does not restrict him either. However, people have a natural tendency that they want to control their assets even after they're gone. And for that we have legal instruments, such as a will, which details what a person wants to do with one's assets after one's demise. Now, in halacha, a will has no power whatsoever, because, to put it crudely, dead is dead. The person's not here anymore. Not here anymore, he cannot govern what happens with his assets. However, and this is an enormous however, the nature of people is such that that concept is not acceptable to people. And therefore, we are going to see all sorts of mechanisms that allow a will to be effective. So there is one mechanism called an halachic will. And the halachic will is that the person transferred all of what he wanted to do with his assets a minute before one's death. So that technically the person was still alive when he passed the assets to whoever he wanted to pass it to. And this is a halachic will. And there are many forms of halachic wills that exist today, both in the United States and here in Israel. However, there is a second concept, which is very difficult for us to reconcile with the first concept that I mentioned, that after a person is no longer here, a person has nothing to say regarding one's assets. There's a concept that the Gemara mentions for us, mitzvah l'kayim divrei ames. It's a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the deceased. If the deceased made his or her wishes known to reliable people, tells his attorney, I want this and this to go to this, so it's a mitzvah to do what he said. So, to a certain extent, that should activate a will, because the will is the divrei ames, what he wanted to do. And therefore, even a halachic will would be unnecessary. So those are two concepts that exist already. And then many times in halacha, the concepts on the surface at least appear contradictory one to another. And then it becomes a question of which one will we enforce when and regarding what circumstances. There's a third thing that's involved here, and that is the issue that the Bnot Tzlofchad raised. Why should daughters be excluded? They said, Loma Nigora. They're the first feminists. How can it be that we should not have a share just because my father didn't have sons, but he had daughters? Why are they not entitled? So here we have another concept, which the Torah tells us that there is a pecking order, so to speak, in inheritance. Sons inherit. If there are sons, then the sons inherit, the daughters don't inherit. That's the Gemara in Bava Basra. How could it be that the daughters don't inherit? Why do they inherit only when there are no sons? Isn't that what, in effect, the daughters of Tzlofchad said, Lama Nigora? Why should we be discriminated against? We're as much flesh and blood and family of the deceased as the boys are. So, to further confuse the matter, now when it comes to money, confusion reigns. So the Gemara, the Mishnah already in Bava Basra discusses Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, who said that even when there are sons, daughters inherit certain percentage under certain circumstances. But the concept was already in the time of the Mishnah that there are circumstances when daughters can inherit even though there are sons. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is a holy Tana. How could he go against the Torah? If the Torah says no, so how does he say yes? To whatever extent he says it. That is one of the ideas that the commentators to the Talmud and the decisors of Jewish law over the centuries have grappled with, because this is not an unusual case. There are many, many instances when a person wants to leave money to his daughters, whether he has sons or he doesn't have sons. So we find that, for instance, in Morocco and Algeria, our Sephardic brethren, that already in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, they had a custom that the daughters got 10% of the estate, no matter what. So, I mean, naturally, if there were no sons, then they got the whole estate. But if there were sons, and the sons inherited, the sons had to provide 10% of the estate for the daughters. That was an accepted communal custom brought in the, quoted in the annals of the Sephardic poskim in that, in medieval times. How did they do that? It's the same problem with Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. If the Torah says daughters don't inherit, well, I have a custom that they do inherit. So where do you find that basis in halakha that you can make a custom, so to speak, negative, and opposite to an explicit statement in the Torah? Now let's go to Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz went even farther than the Sephardim. We find that where do you find it in the Marshal in the 15th century? Reuven is going to marry Leah. Leah's father is a person of means. Now, it's not nice to say this publicly, but that's part of Reuven's love for her. Part of his attraction is that eventually there's going to be money in the family. Now, Leah had brothers. So by marrying Leah, he's going to get nothing, because the daughter's not going to inherit with her sons. So there was a custom in Ashkenaz that in the Tanoim that preceded the marriage, now we don't have Tanoim today, I don't know why. When I got married, they still had Tanoim. I mean, legitimate Tanoim. They told you in advance, this and this and this. The books are going to go to him. The house is going to go to this one. They said what's going to happen. And those were the conditions under which you got married. And you knew in advance the script. So there was no later fights. The fights were by the Tanoim already. But if you got past that, so then all the issues were settled. And that's why it was called Tanoim. Those were the conditions. Today there's just a bland statement that everybody loves everybody and they agree on everything and goodbye. And then the fight comes later. So in the Tanoim, in the medieval times in Ashkenaz, they wrote down that the daughter was going to get was called a chatzi mona. She was going to get half of one share. So let's say there were a certain amount of sons, and they're going to be, let's say, 8 shares. So she gets a half of an 1/8 share. And that was accepted. If the father-in-law was especially generous, or there were other extenuating circumstances, so then he got a full mona. She got a full share. She inherited equally with her brothers. And that's brought in the Tshuvas. In fact, some of the great poskim themselves record that when they got married, they got a full share. So again, how did they do that? If in the Torah it says that what? That daughters don't inherit, then how are we passing out shares here? Everybody's getting, the daughter gets a half, she gets a full. The Sephardim, she gets 10%, whatever. So this is an issue that for thousands of years, from the time the Mishnah we have it already, Rabbi Wein Parsha, and Rabbi Wein Parsha is a reflection of earlier times. So almost from the first day that this halacha came into being, it came into being in the breach and not in the fulfillment. So what does the Torah mean here? And then there's an issue in the Torah, it's called Mavir Nachla. to give an inheritance to someone that's not entitled. I take the inheritance away from A and give it to B, which is what people do in a will, and they don't let the laws of the Torah operate. So let's say under the laws of the Torah, the uncle or the brother should get, and the will said, no, I want the granddaughter to get it. So there are various ways of looking at this question. And you'll agree with me that it's a very practical matter. So one way to look at it is, again, the halachic will, which I think every attorney here in Israel has different forms of it that exist and are recognized by the judicial system here. The same thing is true in the United States. And I'm sure in England, I'm sure wherever there still is a semblance of the rule of law, that's the way to, so to speak, avoid all problems. But many people don't do it, and everybody should make a will, but many people don't do it because either they're convinced they're going to live forever. There are such people. Or because of the fact they think it's bad luck, which is stupid. For various reasons. So this question, I heard a very interesting answer once, a discussion on it from Rabbi Weiss. He was a great posek, great Talmud Chacham here in Israel. He's really a remarkable person. So he raised all the issues, how our customs are to be mavir nachla when the Torah said that you're not allowed to be mavir nachla. So he said an insight, and he said he has no proof for the insight, but it resonated with me. He said that when the Torah forbade mavir nachla, giving property, taking it from one and giving it to another, that was only in cases where there was no reason to do so. It's purely arbitrary. However, if there is a reason, the daughter took care of the father. This person was a great friend of the deceased, etc., where there are reasons that are logical why the person wants out of reason why he's doing it. But if there is valid reason, so then the Torah did not forbid it. Because that's the will of the person. That's the idea of mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis. We know what the person wanted. We know why he wanted it. So then we should fulfill that person's wishes. We should do what that person wanted to happen. And therefore, that's why all of these customs prevailed. So like in Ashkenaz, you wanted to marry off your daughters. So just like today, you want your daughter to marry a great Talmud Chacham out of Ponevezh, you got to give him an apartment or something, right? We may cluck and say that's not nice, but those are the facts. So there's a reason why the person gave a chatzi mona or a full mona to his future son-in-law, to his daughter rather, but through her to go to the future son-in-law. Even though it's Mavrin Achla from the brothers. But there's a compelling reason as to why it's being done. And the reason has within it positive motives. It's not done out of spite. Now, there's the second issue. Sometimes, God forbid, in a family, and it happens, children and parents don't see eye to eye. So it depends on what. But sometimes it's on very basic matters. So for instance, a bad example, but just to put it into the context, in the Rothschilds, for generations, if someone intermarried, they couldn't be in the family and they couldn't be in the business. Because the old man felt that was a red line that couldn't be crossed. So sometimes it happens that a father and a son have a terrible dispute on what they consider to be a basic issue in life. Does the father have the right to disinherit the son? So here we have again, the Torah is so sensitive to human events that it provides a variety of how to look at things. So the Gemara says a person should never disinherit his children completely. Afilu Rishoyim. Even if they do things that are against them, completely against them. So the Gemara says the reason is because we play a long-term game. You don't know what it'll be 2 or 3 generations from now. We have, in many areas of Jewish life today, generations of Bali Tshuva from people who 2, 3 generations who were completely non-observant. We have converts, Gerim. You don't know what's going to happen. That's what makes life so interesting. So don't play God. So the Gemara says don't disinherit. But on the other hand, that's disinherit completely. But if I want to give my son that's, let's say, in the kollel, I want to give him 90% of the estate, and the other son, who is no longer observant, etc., and has rebelled against everything, so I'm only going to give them 10%, that you're allowed. But you have to give something. You cannot disinherit completely. The Torah doesn't allow for that. Because there are long-term consequences in all of this. Because of this complication, the entire matter that I've discussed with you, the Gemara's opinion is don't leave anything for anybody. spend every last agora. The Gemara, so Rabbi Yochanan said, "Oivei, I thought he was smarter than that." The Ozvu la'acherin chelom, it says by Shlomo HaMelech. People are foolish, they leave their wealth to others.
Rabbi, it's called going skiing. What's skiing?
So that, the Gemara recognizes that. The Gemara and therefore we have all of these systems, and therefore we have all of these problems. But I have one story which I conclude here. I think, I don't know if I put it in the book of stories or not. But it really has resonated with me my entire life. That when my grandfather passed away, he was a Litvisher Rav, my yeshiva, a Rav in Chicago for many years. So I remember I was 10 years old when my mother was sitting Shiva for my grandfather. And I was an only child, so I was always around. I was always with the adults. So I heard that my mother and my aunt discussed the fact that my grandfather had a life insurance policy with New York Life. And that they thought it was worth $10,000, which in 1944 was money. And my aunt and my mother already decided that between how the policy